Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. And I'm very gratified and pleased to share my next guest with my regular listeners. Julie Jones is a fascinating person. I should add, she's written a book called How to Be a World-Class Investigator, which will cue up this conversation. Julie is a former UK policewoman, undercover operator, and you are now a private investigator. You're founder and CEO of Human Eye Intelligence Services, which is an international consultancy specializing in cybercrime investigations and online open source intelligence. And you are a recognized international expert in trafficking, and we've known each other for years and collaborated together on cases. For my listeners who know that I help families rescue loved ones, I often need Julie's assistance to find out about the predator or help locate victims of the predator. Develop strategies for helping to intervene with the loved one. You've flown around the world. You've done trainings, all kinds of incredible things. I should also say you had a TV show on in the UK, and all I can say is I'm glad you're doing your good work, and I want to peel back for people the importance now in 2024 with all this disinformation and all this radicalization online, hypnosis and other things. Just get your expertise and point of view as a former law enforcement professional and now private investigator. Welcome, Julie Jones.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it. I'm so really happy to be here. I'm glad we finally are doing this.
Yes, for sure. It's a long overdue. So let's give our listeners a bit more of your backstory.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to share about how you came to become a world-class expert in private investigations?
So my career started 27 years ago as a British police officer. As you mentioned, I was with the West Yorkshire Police.
Mm-hmm.
I served for a number of years. I was everything from an undercover operator to a detective to a field intelligence officer, and that really that final role as a field intelligence officer was the most interesting and really set me up for the work that I do today. My role at that
Mm-hmm.
time, and of course this was back in the late 90s, the early 2000s, before social media, before iPhones, when technology was still really, or the internet was still really in its infancy, particularly in investigations. But my job involved three main tasks at that time. So I was responsible for going into prisons and interviewing sex offenders to gather intelligence about methodologies and grooming tactics and that kind of thing. I was also responsible for dealing with potentially dangerous offenders in our division. So I would
Mm-hmm.
keep a track of the offenders in the community and also those that were coming out of prison. And I was also responsible for dealing with covert human intelligence sources. So finding information from people infiltrating gangs and groups and organized crime. So that really developed my passion for intelligence and also for humanity and technology. We started to use more and more technology to investigate serious crimes. We solved in one of the earlier crimes that we solved using Facebook. This was around about 2004. We solved an armed robbery by identifying clothing that somebody had posted on social media. And that was
Mm-hmm.
really quite groundbreaking stuff at the time. And so I immediately developed this passion for technology and could see, looking into the future, how this would change the face of law enforcement and society with this new social media stuff that we had not seen before. User-generated content and people actually interacting with the technology in a way that we could communicate with each other. We had never
Yep.
seen it.
Right. So I want to just add, if I may, Julie, being a woman and a lot of the predators are men, you had a unique insight into the mindset of these predators, which is absolutely vital when working with cult leaders. Because they're malignant narcissists. They're very stereotypical, right? And you, I'm sure, interviewed countless victims. And I know that you have a passion for protecting trafficking victims. So I just wanted to add that, not to interrupt your thing, but it's a lot of people think of PIs as men.
Right.
And it's like, not necessarily.
That's so true. And this is actually, that exact topic was the nucleus for me writing my book. So fast forward from my police career. So I took a leave of absence because I wanted to explore the technology and the intelligence side of technology. So I found there was a company that was coming over to my police force to do training on internet intelligence, a Canadian company. And I was so fascinated with this topic. I just wanted to learn as much as I could. So I took a leave of absence, a 2-year secondment, and came over to Canada to learn everything I could about internet investigations and how, the future of crime and technology, that interspersement, and cyber psychology and all of those subjects that were emerging. And I never went back. I fell in love with Canada, fell in love with this work, and I left the UK and never returned.
So I unfortunately, the Canadian mail system didn't get me a copy of your book in time to hold it up. But do you have a copy you can hold up for people watching the video that's on my blog, How to Become a World-Class Investigator, an Insider's Guide to a Secretive Industry. Fantastic.
Yeah, and I ended up writing this. So when I came to Canada, I worked with that company for about 12 years. And we were mostly an education company. So I traveled around the world teaching law enforcement, government, military, Fortune 500s, NGOs, how to use the internet as an investigative tool. But I was itching to get back to the front lines. I missed investigation. I enjoyed teaching, but I really missed doing the actual frontline work. So I decided to leave that company eventually and set up my own company, Human Eye, back in 2016. And it was what I found when I re-entered the investigations industry was it was a very male-dominated industry. Most of the people, most of the investigators, the PIs, were old male police officers, retired in their 50s or 60s. And I found it a very hostile environment for a woman.
An old boys network.
It was an old boys club. And I went to people to ask for help. And these were people who had been my clients, but now I was becoming a competitor and people didn't want to help me. So but at the same time, I started doing this TV show, and so that really raised my profile. And as a result of that raising of my profile, I got a huge number, like hundreds of emails a day, from women around the world saying, "How do I get to do what you do? This is, I want to break into this industry. I feel like I'd be good at it, but I wasn't a police officer. Plus, I'm a 22-year-old woman. I've just come out of university. How do I break into this industry? Nobody will help me." And I got so many of those types of emails that I decided to put it into my book. So that was the purpose of me writing my book, was to talk about that difficulty of breaking into this industry, which is a very different industry now than it was 20 years ago, because now we have younger people who have grown up as digital natives with these fantastic skills, who can code, who can, they're intuitive investigators because this is their environment that they've worked in, but
Right.
nobody will take them seriously, and particularly
Hmm.
difficult for women.
Yeah, it's incredible. Can I ask, when did you come across my work? Because I remember it's been
It
years.
has. And I know you and I have talked about this, trying to remember when and how we met. And I believe it will have been probably when I was with my old company, and
Hmm.
somebody probably reached out for some help with this kind of work, because
Hmm.
it was your work and the work of people like you, very esteemed either forensic psychologists or people that worked in that field,
Right.
investigators, that made me want to get back into the investigation side of things.
Right.
So,
So my
yeah,
recollection, which is not perfect by any
no,
stretch, but I think you read Combating Cult Mind Control,
yeah,
and you were like, oh, I've worked with gangs. I've worked with domestic violence victims. This is
yeah,
all very familiar to me.
hmm,
Now I have a framework
right,
and I have more of an understanding into how people's minds can get hacked.
yes,
And, um, and so you reached out to me maybe for one of your clients. And then I'm
yeah,
like, come to think of it, I have clients that could use your services.
right,
I have I'd worked with Larry Ziliox and a few other PIs, for years previously, but they retired or moved on. So you and I have been working together for a bunch of years
hmm,
now.
yeah. Our work is very complementary, and I still, I have a copy of the bite model on my desk always,
Mm,
and
mm,
I've learned so much, and for me, continued education and learning is vital, because the as the technology evolves, society evolves, and psychology evolves, and the ways that people, the new and interesting ways people find to manipulate each other, to exploit other people, is constantly
right.
changing. So I'm constantly consuming as much information as I can so I can stay on top of my game.
Right. And before we started recording, I said I've just referred two more clients to you on after consulting with them, and both of them had hired
Mm,
PIs who are old school,
right.
who don't understand that some perps actually believe they're Jesus or they
Right.
believe they have these psychic powers.
Hmm.
So they don't have the necessary background framework for giving good advice. So
Right.
everything to them is a con
Right.
or a criminal, overtly criminal thing. And I say to my clients, some people are overt cons, in which case, if we are able to correctly assess that, we can threaten them
Hmm.
and they'll move on to other victims
Yeah. Yeah.
or take a
Dissuade them.
buyout and you dissuade them. But a lot of my the predators I come across were in a cult themselves.
Hmm.
They were hypnotized themselves, and now they are on a delusionary psychotic course and taking a lot of good people with them.
Right.
And it requires a PI with that nuanced understanding,
Hmm.
especially when interviewing former members of one of these victims, which is a very important, vital source of information for me to advise the family,
Yeah.
is having a proper forensic, interviewer who
Hmm.
knows how to, make people feel comfortable, especially if they're women, and share the specific, techniques that were used on them, because then it will give us a roadmap on how to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, this work requires a high degree of sensitivity. And I've had many people say to me that their experience dealing with a female investigator is quite different than a male investigator, particularly somebody that's familiar with technology and familiar with cults, with mind control, with coercive control,
Right,
manipulation, brainwashing, hypnosis, and how that manifests online, because it's
right,
quite different in the online environment than it is in real life. Exploitation and manipulation can happen very quickly or it can happen very slowly over time with somebody that
Right.
thinks they're talking to a friend, or, particularly through online dating. And there's just so many ways that can happen. And
Right.
a lot of people really aren't knowledgeable about this area
Right.
and don't believe in it. Don't believe
Exactly.
that hypnosis can happen online. They don't believe that people can be coerced, and they're really quite cynical about it.
Right. Because they walk around with the incorrect belief that we're rational beings who make conscious, rational choices
Mm-hmm.
instead of realizing we're emotional beings who do rationalizing. And likewise, people like to walk around thinking it can only happen to weak, stupid,
Exactly.
uneducated people, but I am two together
Mm-hmm.
could never happen to me until you look into this work and you go, oh my God, there's so many brilliant, talented people who are caught at a vulnerable moment of their life, or death of a loved one, an illness, breakup of a relationship, moving to a new city, state, or country, any number of factors.
Yeah.
And they befriend the wrong person, or they get approached online by people
Yeah.
who have gotten their data in the black, online black information environment. And then they're psychic and they can tell you the name of your dog and the
It's
name of your first husband. And you're like, oh my God, they're psychic. And they're not thinking, oh, they bought my data and
right.
they're they're doing a process on me.
Exactly. And we also are in an era, the most lonely era of, I think, human
Mm,
history. COVID really caused a lot of people to go online, and a lot of people that are not necessarily familiar with some, some of the ways that people will target people online. And you're absolutely right. The huge amount of data that's out there about people, and you can go through, do a quick scan through somebody's Facebook or Instagram, find the things that are important to them, and then befriend them in an innocuous way online, or join a group that they're in. So you've got that shared interest, and start to manipulate and exploit people for either financial gain, sexual extortion,
right.
trafficking, any
Power,
number of
money,
things.
sex.
Right.
That's what I say is the always for power
Yeah.
over. And that's what rape is
Mm.
power.
Yeah.
Power, money, sex. But I can't help but say, Julie, that we're now obviously living in the age of AI,
Mm-hmm.
and with social media and with developed personality profiles, people can be manipulated at scale by
Yeah.
bad state actors who want to mess around with elections, for example, get people to give up and not want to vote, or nudge them in a direction towards a candidate or away from a candidate
Mm.
by, negative programming about the opponent.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah. I mean, again, online manipulation it catches people when they're vulnerable, or it catches people when they're verbose. And when
Mm,
they have a strong belief system about a certain thing, they can very easily find other like-minded people. And we saw this back even in the early 90s with the very early days of internet relay chat. If you want to abuse a child, or you want child abuse imagery, you can find other people online very easily that are interested in that same thing. Whereas before the internet, if you were a pedophile and you wanted to share materials with somebody, then you would have to go physically and find another pedophile to share those materials with. Whereas now, it's so easy to do that, and the technology is there to assist you in hiding your identity, in meeting other people. And speaking of AI, one of the phenomenon that we're now seeing is the generative AI, so generating child sexual abuse imagery
mm,
using artificial intelligence. So this is child sexual abuse images that are not real. And there's a real debate raging right now, certainly across the United States and the Western world, about, is this a good or a bad thing? That
mm-hmm.
generative AI can create child sexual abuse imagery because that means that it's not a child, an actual physical child being abused. It's a construct based on a technological generation. But does
Yeah,
that
there.
lead to then further abuse of other children? Because, somebody can now view that knowing that it's not actually a child, but then does that increase their desire to go and abuse an actual child?
Yeah, and I'll just say I've worked with a lot of folks who are neuroatypical, and they have a different way of approaching reality. And for a number of them, they were arrested for downloading real child
Mm.
sexual pornography and images, but they didn't understand why it's a bad thing.
Right.
Like, they just didn't have the education
Mm-hmm.
around that. And furthermore, just to, again, we're in this brave new world of artificial intelligence and even androids.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like android sex workers are on their way,
Right.
where, and you can have child android
Mm-hmm.
sex toys. And should society say that's not okay, or if it diverts people from actually harming humans? There's so many ethical questions that have not been addressed in any responsible way.
Yeah.
And as you know, I've invested a lot of time in developing my experience and expertise to develop an influence continuum and bite model framework for evaluating undue influence. But it's to this moment, people are still clueless
Mm-hmm.
of even like values of informed consent is
Right.
legitimate,
Yeah.
and lying, withholding information, or distorting it is not okay. And just to have a clarity around that one dimension is
It's
so critical.
It is, and it's a very complicated topic. These last 2 or 3 years, I've been heavily involved in conducting diagnostic studies across a number of countries in North, South, and Central America on human trafficking and our capacity to investigate and effectively prosecute human trafficking, which of course is often linked to organized crime, money laundering, corruption, uh, you know, a lot of government corruption and corrupt officials
Right.
involved in human trafficking. And just the nuances of identification of what trafficking is, huge misunderstandings as to what trafficking is. We still need a lot of education. What is consent? One of the things that I've really talked about a lot in my teachings and trainings around this is the subject of acquiescence and the
Mm.
nuances of acquiescence. It's something that I don't think we talk about enough. It's a word that a lot of people have never heard of or know how it relates to informed consent. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
that's a subject that we really need to talk about as well, because it's very relevant to online behavior that then transforms into real world behavior.
Yeah, so when you use that term acquiescence, I think grooming and
Mm-hmm.
what pimps do. Can you
Yeah.
share some more details with our listeners?
Yeah, of course. So acquiescence is it's even a difficult word to describe because some people think of it as giving in. Some people think of it as not quite informed consent, but consent either way. So when you acquiesce to something, you kind of give in. You don't fight it. And this is an issue for a lot of rape victims and a lot of trafficking victims because
Right.
it particularly rears its head in trafficking because the courts take a very black and white view, particularly around consent and those kind of things. And there's this prevailing sense that if you didn't say no, then you said yes or you meant yes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
there's that big gray area in between where if you didn't or you couldn't say no, or you didn't understand what you were saying yes to, then that's acquiescence in the middle. It's when
Right.
consent isn't informed consent. You might consent to something that you don't realize is then going to turn into something else. Or you might something might happen and you don't say no because you're frozen. You're in fight or flight or freeze or, one of those other
Right.
states when you're afraid, or you don't have the mental capacity to be able to say no or to say yes. If you're a child,
Right.
you can't consent to rape. So if a minor has sex with an older man, that might be acquiescence because that person doesn't necessarily know that they can say no, that they're allowed to say no, or they don't feel safe enough to say no.
Yep. So if I may take my hat on, put my hat on as an expert witness, and cite the Shefflin social influence model, Alan Shefflin being a law professor emeritus, dear friend of mine who passed away last year, but he created a social influence model to help parse for judges and juries, Your Honor, here's the influencee and their unique vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the influencer. Maybe they're a malignant narcissist. What was their purpose? What were their techniques? What were the consequences using my bite model, etc.? In other words, social influence has to be seen as a system of influence between the predator and the victim. It's not just, did the victim say no or kick the guy in the nuts?
Right.
And if she didn't, then she liked it.
Right.
And that's
exactly.
not nuanced enough in terms of really protecting human rights.
Right. And this is one of the things when I've been working, particularly down in South and Central America, where the culture is different and the, women and the rights of women and girls are not as progressive as they are in North America, or other places. And, women are, girls are sexualized from a young age, and some boys as well. It's not just a female problem, but predominantly a female problem. And people are drawn or lured into trafficking, partly because of their circumstance, but they've been sexualized from a very young age. It's been normalized. The exploitation of people is normalized in certain environments. And so these people don't realize they can say no. They don't, it's not even in their mind to try and argue against what's happening. But then they go to court, or usually what happens is the victims get arrested because the criminals know, the organized crime gangs know that the best way to manipulate a victim is to criminalize them, because then they can't go to the police. So it's also the same
or
in
they
some...
believe they can't.
Right. Or they believe they can. Right.
Right.
Because no one's going to believe them. And, we see this
and
in
pimps
cults
use women
right.
who they've victimized to recruit other women.
Exactly.
Right. As another example of this, what I call victimizer model of, it was done to me and I need to pass it on and victimize other people. Of course, they don't think of it as a victimizer thing. They think they're helping the other person. And I just want to be really clear with you, for my listeners, trafficking can be labor trafficking, not just sex trafficking. So people can be lured into slavery, believing they're going to make a lot of money, send and help their family in another country, for example, or even here.
Yeah.
And they are then made to feel like they have to work to pay off their rent and everything else, and their passports taken away. If it's, there's so many dimensions to the labor trafficking piece,
and all of it. And it is situational, and geography plays a big part in it as well. And people think that trafficking only occurs internationally or across borders, and it doesn't. You can be trafficked in your own house. You can be exploited in your own home. You can have a young girl who still just goes to school every day, and she's a trafficking victim. And it can occur, across borders. It can be forced begging. It can be forced pregnancy. There's factories.
Pornography.
Yeah, pornography,
I know.
webcam sites.
Yeah, I have a personal colleague friend who revealed that her grandfather was, taking pornographic videos of her and selling it. And nobody knew.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except her images are online,
Right.
and then there's the issue of what do we do to own our own images?
Yeah. I mean, the internet, of course, has just made all of this so much easier, from recruiting, grooming, and again, that's something that I don't feel that we talk enough about, is online recruitment and online grooming.
Yeah, I did a chapter for an Oxford University press book on lone actor terrorism,
Hmm.
and my chapter was the lone chapter on online radicalization.
Right.
And most of the other chapters were focusing on what kind of people, what's the profile of
Mm.
people who become lone actor terrorists. And they're missing the social influence piece. It was
Right.
just like, well, I was grateful to have a chapter in it.
Mm.
But again, we need to understand human beings. Um, well, I want to mention a book by two neuroscientists who wrote a book called The Knowledge Illusion.
Mm.
And what they said is human beings think they know stuff, and Google has
Yeah.
made it worse
Yeah.
because they think they can just Google it and get the answer to anything. But in fact, human beings know very little, and they have historically had to go to experts.
Hmm.
A bank, an investment expert to tell them how to invest their money, go to a therapist to talk about their issues. But now people, just don't understand how that's been co-opted and hacked.
Absolutely. And, just coming back to the social influence piece, I think we're on the verge of seeing a phenomenon of self-exploitation online. And this is based on social influence, based on social media sites where a lot of people are seen to be making an awful lot of money by doing stupid things, sexual things, and taking that, filming themselves doing those things and putting that out for exploitation to make money.
Yeah, yeah. And I forget the source, but I read somewhere recently that young people were asked what do they want to be when they grow up? A teacher, a lawyer, a doctor, and they want to be an influencer.
Hmm. Yeah, it's about this attention economy that we're in, where the more attention you can have, the more interaction you can make money, and the social media platforms are pushing this because
Mm-hmm.
they they don't have to produce any content. They just create a platform, and everybody does all the work for them, and they're just a conduit for self exploitation, and it's
Yeah.
increasing.
Yeah. And to me, again, because of my mental health background, I have real questions. Are they choosing to take off their clothes and
No,
sell, live videos? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I agree with you. I think, these it's it's like we're seeing in South and Central America, this normalization of sexualization of children from a young age, and we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing it here. We're
Mm-hmm.
starting to see that people get attention that they crave from self exploitation, and I don't know I don't know many people, many young people that would feel good about that. They might feel good about it at the time, because if they get the number of likes that they want, or there's some positive reinforcement of this self victimization. But
Yeah.
when all that stops, or it falls off, or it doesn't happen, people realize that they were effectively brainwashed.
Right, exactly. So I interviewed a social psychiatrist, Carl Marcy, Marci, on my podcast previously. He wrote a book called Rewired by Harvard University Press about how the internet is rewiring our
Hmm.
brains. And he strongly recommended don't even show a child under 3 TV. Like, children learn from
Yeah,
interacting with humans.
yeah,
They need their mom, their dad, their aunts, their uncles, their grandparents, because the brain is still forming, and
Mhm.
you want to encourage a secure attachment to humans.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, this is something when I teach, I get this question a lot because I have a daughter and she's in her last year of university and she's working with me now as an apprentice. And but I had a lot of questions from people. I bet you never let your child have technology. You know the evils of the internet. I bet you never let her use the computer. Or I'm having this problem with my child. Should I punish them by taking away their iPad or taking away their phone?
mm,
my I had a very different philosophy around this from when my daughter was a child,
mhm,
which was to encourage critical thinking, to encourage conversation and discernment around what is appropriate and not appropriate behavior online, to question what she sees and to think about it in terms of um, is this good for me? Is this bad for me? Does this seem right? And so we talked about it, and I never ever had a problem with her online.
mm,
And our communication around the internet, she would come to me and tell me things that were happening to her friends. So and so received this
mhm.
email. Does this seem bad? Somebody reached out to my friend and asked her to send a photograph. What should she do? And
Sexting, yeah.
right. And and so I was able to help her, and then she was able to help her friends. And so she
Right.
grew up with that understanding that technology is neutral. It's not good or bad. But if you're using that iPad as a babysitter, you might think, well, they're playing games on it, and these games are educational, and so that's a good thing. It's never a replacement for that human attention.
Right. Right. It's never a replacement. I just interviewed a lawyer from Canada originally, Louise Dubé of icivics.org, and she talked about how she got interested in being the CEO of this civics education because her son was doing a game
Mm.
that was teaching civics. And she was like, a game that my son wants to play
Right.
online? Like, what is this thing? But it's so, it's not evil unto itself. But I also do want to mention a documentary, I think, which is much must viewing for everyone. It's called The Social Dilemma,
Hmm.
and it features former executives of the top social media platforms who are interviewed talking about what happens behind the scene. And as you said a moment ago, Julie, about the attention economy and
Hmm.
how they make more money the longer people stay on platforms. And these executives said they wouldn't let their kids
Mm.
be on screens or iPads or whatever until they got
Yeah,
much older.
absolutely.
And it's something.
Yeah, they've got to be able to think critically. I don't think
Yeah.
a child should be in an environment online where they're interacting with other people or content that is out in the wild. So if you've got a controlled environment where you have a game with no other interaction, you can approve it. You see that it's educational. It's not out online, so there's no internet access.
Yeah.
Um, I don't have a problem with that. I do
Mm-hmm.
have a
Mm-hmm.
problem when children are allowed to go on, I don't know, Minecraft or these multiplayer games where they can communicate and interact with others online that they don't know, and they don't have the social skills or the tools to discern whether or not this person is, good or bad,
Who they
or
say they are.
yeah, or who
you
they say
know.
they are. They have no way of knowing, and there is a distinct and increasing lack of social integrity that
Right.
we have to be aware of. We can't pretend it's not there.
Right. So in 2015, Julie, I think I told you the story. I was invited to an Aspen Institute invitation only meeting to figure out countering ISIS recruitment online with top people. And one of the computer experts who had been monitoring their recruitment said this analogy. He said, think of STDs. And we were all looking at each other. What is he talking about? He said, the more sex you have with someone who has syphilis, the more likely you are to get it.
Right.
He said, if you understand that, then you understand how ISIS recruits online, because they make a contact, like on a game, a video game, or a matchmaking site, or one of their other friend groups, and they start interacting and befriending and then luring them to other platforms that are a little bit more encrypted and secretive. And they start to swarm them, what we used to call love bombing in the Moonies. And in real life, this is online, where you think you're making all these friends, but they're bots or they're other members of the cult that are just and he talked about how and this was something the Moonies did in the 70s. They introduced someone who appears to be a newbie like you, but they're actually a covert member of the cult.
Yeah.
But then that person is expressing their doubts, but then when they join, it's more likely that they'll suck the new person, the real target, in with them.
Absolutely. We see this in cults. I've investigated a lot of cults, of course, and also organized crime groups, terrorism groups. In my 27 years, and particularly now where most of my work is involved in, looking at this kind of thing, we definitely see that there is a technique to this. There is a very refined technique of befriending somebody and encouraging somebody to go out and do your research, because they know that that person is going to come back to them with some doubts and some questions, and they want that. They want the opportunity to refute those doubts and to answer, to overcome those questions. It's a typical sales technique. Any person, any sales training that you see, one of the things that they encourage you to do is, get those doubts out in the open and address them before the person even expresses those doubts. So if somebody's buying a car and, you've talked to that person, you've kind of learned what they're looking for. You can say, now, I know you said you weren't necessarily looking for something with a hatchback, or I know you weren't necessarily looking for these sporty wheels, but you can get this for this amount. And that person thinks, oh, they heard me and they're acting in my best interest. And I did have that doubt, but actually it's okay. And so that's a technique that's encouraged online. And it's a manipulative technique to make you feel seen and heard and safe and like, oh, this person really has my back. I can trust them.
Yeah, and then just to use the thought-terminating cliche that QAnon and other conspiracy cults use of do your own research, and then you give them 50 YouTube video links of your own propaganda videos.
Right.
Well, the person said, well, I did my research. These are the things that help me the most, but they're all propaganda, right?
Exactly.
And I'll add, you were talking a moment ago about critical thinking. I would say media literacy, especially in this age of deep fakes of AI, it adds another dimension of caution. And I've been talking about encouraging people to create what I call trust pods of people who you trust, who care about you. They don't have an ulterior motive, a secret agenda. And if you're being invited to a new online workshop or webinar or whatever, before you submit your brain to it and your time, ask your pod, hey, I'm thinking of doing X. What do you think? And you can rotate roles of someone be the contrarian. Like go out of your way to find what to complain about or what's wrong with this. And watch each other's back, because then it will up your likelihood of staying safer.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that I work in quite a lot as well is as cults and that kind of thing online is also fraud and organized crime. And, human trafficking kind of crosses over both of the cults and the multi-level marketing, that online persuasion environment, along with organized crime fraud, that is seen as very dark and murky, and not so much a human problem, but more in line with, bad people. But there's a lot of crossover there in the techniques that are used. Ultimately, it's just, getting somebody to do what you want them to do. And also being able to weed out those people very quickly that are not going to do what you want them to do. So,
separating the sheep from the goats is what the Moonies called it.
Right. So one of the things that I always, again, when I'm teaching, I always say this to people: the criminals can afford to make, or the traffickers, or the cult leaders, or the recruiters, they can afford to make 100 mistakes a day because it's not really going to have a consequence. The victims and the targets of those people only have to make a mistake once, and you're locked in. So, it's like
great point.
A pickpocket out in a busy square. It's high risk, it's low reward, and the consequence is very real. If you go spend a day in a town square and you try and pick as many pockets as possible, you might be able to pick 3 or 4 people's pockets, but the risk is very high, and you're going to get arrested or you're going to get caught. If you're an online pickpocket, that is, whatever analogy you want to use for that,
I like that analogy.
You can hit 100 people a day in a different way. You're fairly anonymous. The risk is almost zero, and the chances are you're never going to get arrested or go to jail unless you get further down the line. So the world is your oyster online when it comes to recruitment, but the victims, the consequence for them is very high.
Right. Explain what a sock puppet is to my listeners.
Right. So a sock puppet is basically a covert account. Think of the old sock puppets.
The old sock puppets, but it's not you. It's a false identity.
Right. Yeah. And these are so easy to create. From an investigator's perspective, we always use sock puppet accounts. So a fake online identity, a constructed personality, and depending on what it is that you are trying to achieve, that can be a very simple sock puppet account which is basically just a fake email address or a fake name. You can easily generate a profile picture now using artificial intelligence, so that's simple to do. Or you can have a very complex online persona, a legend, as we call it in the undercover world, where you create a whole backstory. And, there are groups, organized crime groups, cults, that have tons of these set up. And these are, they're very authentic looking. They look like they've got a great history. And they will pick one out of the box. Okay, this is our target, or this is our group. Let's find the sock puppet account that is most likely to have success with this person or this group. And, they have those established, and organized crime has it established, human traffickers have it established, and cults have these established.
And state actors like Russia
100%.
have it in large way. Now, Julie, I want to touch on a case that we've consulted about that you were deeply involved with, involving stalking. Mm-hmm. Could you say whatever you're comfortable sharing for our
absolutely.
listeners?
Stalking is becoming a huge problem online, bigger and bigger all the time. It's that low risk, high yield situation online where you can set up numerous fake accounts and stalk somebody. Stalking is still not taken very seriously by law enforcement. In the UK, they're doing a fantastic job. They have great laws when it comes to coercive control. to harassment and stalking.
Explain coercive control to my listeners. They've heard me talk about it previously, but
Yeah, so coercive control, and it depends on the context. So in the
right,
UK, for example, coercive control is based around a domestic relationship, so an
right.
intimate partner relationship, where you are coerced into certain behaviors, certain actions, including not leaving. So it's usually a very slow and insidious process where the person doesn't realize that they're being controlled. And often the coercive control is positive
Mm,
reinforcement. Oh, I much prefer it when you wear your hair like that. Or,
mm,
you'll do a certain thing. Oh, I really liked that you did that. And then coupled with a negative comment like, your hair the other way doesn't look as good. And that
mm-hmm.
plants a little seed in your mind where, when you're in the initial stages of any interaction, any relationship, whether that's an intimate relationship, a work relationship, even meeting somebody online, we typically want to put our best foot forward, present the
Right,
best version of ourselves. And also, we're measuring compatibility and that kind of thing. So we tend to be more open to being the kind of person that we want somebody to think that we are, particularly if we like that person and we want them to like us. We're
right,
we can be very easily coerced into behaving in a certain way that is more appealing to that person. And this
right. But
eventually becomes very insidious and turns into outright abuse, where the person just feels like they can't leave that situation.
right, it often involves isolating the person from
Mm-hmm.
friends and family that have
Yeah,
raised questions about the level of control, turning
yeah,
over your paycheck
right.
to the partner. I mean, very concrete behavioral consequences that
Yeah.
when one looks at it from the outside, it's like, wow, this often a woman is turning over her autonomy to this other person. They're making all the major decisions.
And the thing with coercive control that makes it so difficult to to identify is that it creeps. It's typically very slow, and it starts with small little corrections in behavior, whether positive or negative, and very often doesn't lead to physical violence. And this is where domestic violence, in particular, is very difficult to identify when you've got a situation where somebody is physically able to leave a situation and they don't, then most of the time you have coercive control. Most of the time you have
Mm-hmm.
a situation where somebody is staying not because they want to, but because they don't realize that they can leave because all of their choices have been taken away.
Right. And in the more extreme cases, they have phobias that no one will
Mm.
ever love them. They'll never be happy.
Yeah.
Their life will be a failure.
And particularly for
And
women, where
yeah,
they may not have the financial freedom that some men do. A lot of women who are caught up in coercive control, whether that's in trafficking, cults, domestic or intimate partner relationships, it's financial control that's exerted on them, or that feeling that I will never be successful, I can't live by myself, I need somebody to make my decisions. They're told they make poor decisions. They're told
yeah.
that you'll never manage by yourself. Who's going to hire you? You've got no skills. You've got these children. I've taken your children on. Um, I'm
Oh,
paying for
threats
everything.
around children are huge,
Yeah,
manipulation and control. And then parental alienation things of starting to program the kids against you.
huge.
Um,
Yeah,
it's another angle
yeah,
of manipulate threats to take the kids away
yeah.
if they don't obey
And
and
then
such.
destruction of somebody's reputation online.
Uh,
We've all heard of the term sextortion, which I don't like that. I feel like it minimizes the problem, which is, completely destroying somebody's reputation and
Right.
completely putting something out there. It may not be nude pictures, it may just be something that you've shared in confidence with somebody in that stage of the relationship at the beginning where you're, sharing your past and those kind of things. You share something with somebody and
Right.
they use that against you. It's a very destructive, um, it's a very destructive thing to do. And now, previously, before technology was really prevalent, you couldn't really do that very effectively. Now with the internet
Mm,
and these wide
mm.
social circles that we've got, everybody has an online presence and you can destroy somebody's reputation very easily. In fact, the bigger the presence and the more online friends and groups and profiles somebody has, the easier it is to destroy somebody's reputation.
Yeah, and I can just say groups like Scientology and the Moonies are still trying to say I'm a anti-religious bigot who beats and tortures and rapes people, and they still have website, with ugly pictures of me, putting that out, sending it to media. It
Yeah.
just happened recently with Scientology. I was interviewed by Rolling Stone about a TikTok phenomenon with some street solicitor for Scientology, and there was some TikTok people trying to harass this poor Scientologist to leave the cult.
Mm,
And I was saying that's really unethical. It's against anything that I would. But the reporter had to talk to Scientology and get a comment
right.
on me, and boom, I'm an anti-religious deprogrammer, blah, 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 blah. I was shocked that they're still at it, but they are. But that speaks to the media has to do their due diligence to go, is there any credibility to this? The guy, has two
Mm,
masters and a PhD and is a best-selling author, and, is he? And
yeah.
then, of course, they can ask me, and I belong to a Jewish temple. I did deprogramming in 1976 and 77, and I've been speaking out against anything forcible ever since. And then it's like, where's the evidence that I'm doing these horrible things in
Yeah.
the last 50 years, 40 years?
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Julie Jones, how to be a world-class investigator. Final words to leave with our audience. I just really, thank you for your good work. And I know you're working to develop a Canadian entity to study open source intelligence.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
Final
absolutely.
words for you.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway that I would love to leave people with is know who you are online, know who
Mm,
other people are online, and be discerning. Think critically, and you know most people are intelligent, and
mm.
if something seems too good to be true, we hear it all the time. It probably is, whether that's in a relationship, whether that is like I had somebody reach out to me yesterday because I do a lot of cryptocurrency work and
Oh,
investigation.
I'm so glad you're bringing it up because as you were talking, I was like, I forgot to ask her about cryptocurrency.
Right.
We talked about multi-level marketing.
Right.
Please.
Yeah, so I wrote a book on cryptocurrency back in 2018. It was never published. It was purchased by a cryptocurrency exchange. They bought the rights to it before it was published.
Oh,
Um,
catch and kill.
yeah,
That's a technique of the bad guys.
right. I've done a huge amount of work, and I've been teaching, Bitcoin and working in the dark web for years. Um, but yeah, cryptocurrency is definitely I, I don't want to say I want to be careful what I say about cryptocurrency. I am somewhat of a proponent of it, but it is absolutely a minefield of scams and disinformation, and it's definitely one of those areas right now where a lot of people are losing a lot of money. There's a lot of bots involved.
But
There's the whole decentralization thing. They're selling the dream, and it is a very decentralized idea, but we do not
right,
yet have the regulation. We do not yet have that due diligence that's being done and is still being done in the financial industry
Right.
And I recognize money is a very emotive subject and people want control over their own finances, and I get that. And I think there are ways that you can invest in cryptocurrency safely, but at the same
Really?
time, yeah, I do. I do think that you can.
We'll have to have another conversation, but I
Yeah,
want to come back because we need to wrap up.
sure. Yeah.
Just that without government regulation of
Hmm.
cryptocurrency, it's an ideal thing for criminals, for terrorist groups
Yeah,
to use to transfer assets. And
absolutely.
lastly, if you're a bad actor and you want to destroy the United States and the US dollar
Hmm.
as the world's currency, invest in crypto because that's what would do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm very skeptical still about crypto. So, but I want to have you back, and we'll talk more
We'll talk more
about
about that.
crypto in the future.
For sure.
Julie Jones, how to be a world-class investigator. Thank you for being you, and we'll be in touch with cases to do together.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye. Steve Hassan here. It's been decades since my family rescued me from the Moonies. I've been at this for over 47 years. The need has never been greater. If you're able, please consider hitting the super thanks button below, and it'll help us to do better. Every penny will help us toward our goal of educating the planet about undue influence. Remember, it's your mind. Only you should control it.